I'm going to do a reading from John 13. Sorry, I just need a minute watching Theo plays one of my kids, and it actually brought tears to my eyes to actually see him do his thing. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
So the bus stopped on the side of the road on the grassy margin, and we all got out. The only people on the bus, 4 adults and 3 kids. And we were wearing our masks, of course, and we were wearing our water shoes and our swim trunks. And we gathered at the side of the road, and the person who drove the bus started getting out those big inner tubes that we would use to go down the river in. Now there's a certain amount of, there's privilege I have and my family has. I know there are some people out there who haven't been able to leave their house since March because of the pandemic. We are privileged to have the money and the time to make this kind of trip. We had been promised when we signed the waivers and everything at the front desk that we would have cords to connect the inner tubes together, right? So no kid would be alone. Every kid would be connected by a cord to an adult. But when we asked the bus driver, when we said, can we have the cords? He said, you know what, we're not doing that because of COVID-19. And we let him know, the front desk said something else. And he gave us the one cord he had. So we tied together the cords of Allie, my sister-in-law, and her son, Benjamin, who's 6. And Scott, her husband, Benjamin's father, would hold on to the other inner tubes to keep them together. And so we got out into the water, we pushed our inner tubes out, and we got into the inner tubes, which kind of is no small feat, because if you've ever tried to get your gluteus maximus into one of these things, it's not always easy, right? You kind of upend the thing behind you and jump back, and it works sometimes. So the sun is hot and bright and the sky is blue, and we're floating and the current is calm. But after about 5 minutes, the smooth surface of the water starts to ripple, and the current gets stronger and faster. And we're all going down, and the cord between Allie and Benjamin unties. And Allie, in trying to grab Benjamin, loses her own inner tube and watches as her son drifts away from her downriver. And she's standing on a lip of rock, right? She's watching, standing on a lip of rock. And my youngest daughter, Georgia, and my wife, Miranda, managed to grab Ben, but then they lose him, and then Scott gets him. I managed to grab Allie's inner tube. And meanwhile, my daughters and my wife tie Scott and Benjamin together. But all the while, Allie is standing on that lip of rock, and she's got her hands over her face, over her mouth. We're a few hundred yards downriver now. We're calling out to her, and we say, come on down. Come on, we're down here. All you need to do is put yourself in the water. And she's frozen. Have you ever been frozen like that? On a lip of rock in your life, looking downstream, unable to move? So eventually, she put herself down into the water and drifted. And she came down to where we were, and I pushed the raft over, or the inner tube over to her. And she tried to get on using the aforementioned method I mentioned, which is kind of upending the inner tube and attempting a backwards jump. It wasn't working, and she was sobbing at this point. She said, I can't get in. And Scott held, with two hands, held the inner tube, and between Scott and Allie, they got into their inner tubes. And we continued to float. And we managed to connect, right? We managed to, I connected with my youngest by putting my legs over one side of her inner tube. And we're first coming down the river. And then Benjamin and Allie and Scott are coming down the river, and they managed to stay together with their arms together. And then my wife and my oldest daughter are separate, but coming close together, and they float down. And we all make it. We all make it down the river. And when we come to the boat launch where we're supposed to get off, we step out and we pull our inner tubes up onto the sand. The quote that Sean read us, the quote from the book of John, which of course comes from one of our 6 sources, Christianity, is a scene where Jesus is talking to the disciples and he says, "By this everyone will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And disciples is a word, it means follower, but it also means learner, right? Kind of a student. And what Jesus, I believe, is saying is you can't do this religion thing by yourself, right? You can't show love and embody love by yourself. You have to demonstrate it. You have to enact it with other people. You can't do it by yourself. And I believe being a disciple of Unitarian Universalism is the same. You can't do it by yourself. I mean, if you claim a religion, if you say, I believe this, then that religion ought to make a claim on you as well. You worship, and what you worship should show up in everything you do, right? What you believe in. Worship means worth shape. What you hold as worthy should affect how you behave. Whether you're in a grocery store, or voting, or going downriver in an inner tube. Unfortunately, our culture too often tells us, you just have to take care of yourself. And if you can't, you're somehow less than. Like if someone doesn't have enough money or something like that, or they're standing on a lip of rock, watching their life and elements of it go downriver, they must not have the right stuff. There's no consideration for the relationships, the interdependent web that person's involved in and how that might be affecting them. When I grew up in South Carolina, I encountered the same kind of individualistic culture. You know, people would have pride in, for example, the houses they bought. And that's worthy. I mean, that makes sense. Owning a house is a way of increasing your own wealth and passing it down through generations. But I don't believe they had any kind of history, and I didn't have this history until I was, 40 or so. They didn't know the history of how banks and real estate agents, loan officers would kind of collaborate to redline areas of a city. And if you were in one of those redlined areas, and they would redline it based on race. And if you were in one of those redlined areas, you would have a hard time getting a loan to fix up your house or buy a house. And they didn't know the history of blockbusting, where a real estate agent tells white people that black people are moving into the neighborhood, they better move out fast. And then those white people leave and they sell that house. The real estate agent sells that house to black people for a lot more money. They didn't know about that, but that history affects us today, across generations. I know someone, a UU, talked about how the first principle, the principle of the inherent worth and dignity of all persons, is linked, kind of interconnected with the seventh principle, which is the belief in a web of interdependent being of which we're all a part, right? Everybody's an individual, a person and they're worthy and they have value, but they exist as a node in the interdependent web. Or you could say a thread or a strand. They're part of the larger fabric. I mean, has evidence of the seventh principle been more evident in the world? I mean, we have a global pandemic, and if I go into a party in a house and I'm not wearing a mask, I can give an illness to people I don't even know and never even see. And I might not even know that I have that illness. And when I went down to visit our friends in Connecticut a year ago or so, we met some of their neighbors, a man and a woman. And the woman was kind of pitching her town, and she was saying, you know what? It's a great town. We don't have that much Section 8 housing, right? And she compared it to another town that had more, as if having Section 8 housing was somehow having an unwanted population, a damper on the town, not good for marketing. As if your own property values would ever be worth having someone else be able to live in a house in the same town, as if that were first priority. And that's a me first theology, me first. And we tell our children, you're not the center of the universe. There are a lot of grown-ups going around believing that as well. The river equivalent of me first theology, me first practice, is you're sitting happy in your inner tube and you got plenty of air, and you bought this inner tube with your own money. You don't owe anybody anything. You do that while some inner tubes have less air, or somebody out there might be sitting on a lip of rock, standing on a lip of rock, unable to move. And me first theology is death dealing. It's death dealing. We see that with COVID-19. We see that with this example as well. But the good news is we don't have to live that way. We can be disciples. We can be disciples of the first and seventh principles. We can be followers and learners about it. We can make a study of the interdependent web of all being, of the intersections, of the fabric, of the nodes. We can be disciples of repair. We can and will connect. And when there are no cords and no ways to connect given to us by the structure or the system we live in, we'll make them up. We'll use our own. And we will lift people up who are standing on that rock. We will work with people who are frozen, who are stuck, who are struggling just to get down the river or stuck in an eddy. We can lift them out. We can get everybody going on the right way. We can demonstrate and be disciples of our religion. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.